Well, I'm delighted to have with me today Abby Taylor, who is the Innovation Manager with ELRA's Humanitarian Innovation Fund. And fascinating role. I've worked with Abby on a couple of occasions, and it's really fascinating what she's working on and what the fund is working on. But Abby, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this job title. What does an innovation manager do in the humanitarian sector?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for inviting me to speak about my experiences. So my role is really focused on supporting innovators who are developing solutions to complex challenges, usually, to improve humanitarian action. So the Humanitarian Innovation Fund was set up as a program of ELRA about 10 years ago now, in response to kind of increasing demand and calls for more innovation and better support for innovation in the humanitarian sector. As you might imagine, humanitarians are incredibly innovative by nature. They're operating really complex and challenging environments, and problems need to be solved very, very rapidly, and often with, limited resources and all of those kind of things. So it's kind of about, capturing and mobilizing that innovative spirit and nature which is inherent, and making it into something larger and more sustained and longer term problem solving, essentially. So that's the kind of sphere in which I operate. And so the Humanitarian Innovation Fund funds innovators. We're a grant funding mechanism. So my role as an innovation manager is essentially to find innovators, support innovators, and then learn from innovators. And so repeats the cycle. And I work in a team of innovation managers, and we each have our own kind of, you might say, specialisms. A large part of my focus is how do you scale innovation? So how do you take pilots and convert them into kind of mainstream solutions which are used at scale in the sector. So we design funding challenges to identify the most promising innovations, the ideas or pilots that we enter at many different stages in the innovation journey. For me, obviously, mainly at the later stages of development, and then we support them. So we provide them with grant funding, but we also provide a lot of non-financial support. So particularly through workshops and mentoring and coaching. Some of that we do ourselves, and some of it we bring in outside expertise, which is more specialized. And then really importantly, in our sector, of the humanitarian space, is we learn from what they're doing. There aren't huge numbers of giant success stories, and it's a really complex problem space. So we learn what works, what doesn't work, and we try and share that as much as possible with the other actors who are working in our space.
Well, so it sounds absolutely huge, but of course the challenge that you're addressing is even bigger, so really important. What's interesting, of course, is that's a whole spectrum from enabling, supporting innovations, the things, through to building the capacity to do it, the skill set. So quite a big remit. It begs the question for me then, how did you get here? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an innovation manager?
Yeah, I took a meandering journey, I think you could say, which, whether it makes sense or not, I don't know. But yeah, I would say I've done quite a lot of different things in my short, what you might call a career. I would not necessarily use that term. But I've got a degree in politics, and while I was at university, I got very interested in, really I wanted to travel. So I did some international volunteering, which is a kind of common route for undergrad students. And, that was great. I had a great time. Did some volunteering in Uganda, in quite a rural location for a summer. I don't think it had huge impact. It had a quite a relative impact on me. But when I came back, I became president of the university society that was, involved in organising these trips and sending them. And that was the point at which I thought, oh my goodness, what are we doing here? And I got very kind of interested in how that whole system worked, how people can add value, and what's volunteering all about. So anyway, and at the same time through my degree, I got very involved in or interested in kind of conflict resolution, particularly Northern Ireland, being the generation I am, incredibly important for a British student to understand. So that led me to a master's in war, in conflict, security and development at King's College. So that took me to London, and I did that part-time. And the reason I did it part-time was because I still had no idea what I wanted to do. But that gave me the opportunity to do lots of different volunteering. So I got involved with some kind of, advocacy and support work that was going on around student volunteering, and I got involved with Engineers Without Borders, and just tried a lot of different things. And yeah, I mean, that I suppose Engineers Without Borders, I then ended up doing a lot of fundraising, which then took me in that direction. So I've done a couple of fundraising jobs subsequent to that. And then from there, got more into engineering for international development. I'm not an engineer, but that kind of took me towards entrepreneurship and innovation and that space. And I think the thread through all of that point was all of the roles were about how do you support people to do what they want to do to make the world a better place, whatever that is for that person. But yeah, so I kind of found myself at this intersection of engineering, entrepreneurship and innovation. So did some interesting work there, then ended up working for a kind of UN initiative for a short time, so moved out to Geneva, got to understand how some of those systems work in the UN world, and then kind of Geneva didn't really agree with me, and the reality of UNHQ, some people built for it, some people aren't. Moved to Nepal, where I had the opportunity to work with a really amazing organisation, Field Ready, where their director was editing a book called Managing Humanitarian Innovation. One way or the other, I ended up kind of co-editing. Well, I did co-edited this book with Eric, and so really got some very deep insights into the world of humanitarian innovation. So it was quite a meandering journey, but that got me there. So that was in Nepal in about 2019. So after the earthquake, but quite a long time after the earthquake. Then we left there, went to Sydney. I worked as a business model consultant, strategy and business model consultant for a small firm there, supporting not-for-profit. And then, just too far from home after a couple of years, so came back to the UK, but really saw this opportunity with the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, who I'd been aware of for many years through that work that I've been doing. Saw the role come up, and I thought, that's the one I want. So I came back for it, and was fortunate enough to get the job with some amazing colleagues, and here I am 2 years later. So like I say, meandering journey.
Wow. But a fascinating one, and I think there's a couple of important threads there. I guess for me, one that stands out is we often think of social innovation as somehow different to what goes on in companies like Google. Of course it isn't. If anything, the need for a disciplined approach is even more important because we have limited resources, and they're often very hard to control in the way a corporation might. So in a sense, the skill set which you've clearly absorbed through a variety of different routes, fascinating, is enormously valuable. I wonder if you could tell us then a little bit more about your typical day, and perhaps talk about a couple of projects you're working on. Just give us some examples of what is innovation management in the humanitarian context.
So I think this might be a predictable answer, but there is no such thing as a typical day. But maybe it would be helpful for me to share a few things that I've done this week. So we're 3 days into the week, and I have done a wide range of things, which actually are fairly typical. So started the week with a workshop for innovators. really focused on helping to build their skills and knowledge around what it takes to scale in innovation. So helping them to understand, the things that they will need to consider in terms of the innovation itself, in terms of their business model, in terms of the people around them, the partners, stakeholders, others in their value network, around evidentiary requirements, because of course evidence in the humanitarian sector is incredibly important. We need to know that what we do works and it improves outcomes for people affected by humanitarian crises, and really importantly that there's no risk of harm to those people, because that's unforgivable and against the ethos of what anyone working in this sector is about. So spend the afternoon doing that with some really interesting innovation themes. Then one of the other things I've been doing is finalizing a report, which is about that question of evidence for scaling, and how the requirement changes once you get beyond a successful pilot or proof of concept. Proof of concept.
Yes.
Then what do you need for scaling? And what you need for scaling is to bring more people on the journey. So everything kind of increases in complexity, I would say, at that stage. So finalizing that report. Yesterday I attended a workshop around how you improve the participation of people affected by crises in the development of innovations. So one of the things that makes innovation in humanitarian settings really complex is that your user and your target impact group, and in fact the buyer of the innovation, are often different people. And it might be a lot of different people. So whereas, if I buy a phone, I'm the person who buys it, uses it, and gets the benefit from it. If you're developing a water filter, for example, it might be funded by a donor, bought by an aid agency. It has to be used in many ways by both an aid worker and a person affected by crisis who needs access to clean water, and there's kind of an interplay there. So it's very different to developing any other innovation, and how you involve users and user-centered design and all of those things. That's just a whole new level of complexity in the humanitarian world. So we at the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, we've been doing a lot of work to really increase the level of understanding, knowledge, support available to help innovators to do that, because we know it's critical to good innovation, effective solutions and ethical solutions, things that will work, that people use, but it's very hard to do. So very interesting workshop on that yesterday. From there, I went straight into what we call a funding committee meeting. So that was the meeting to decide on our next cohort of grantees, or in this case, just the selection of one grant, amazing innovation team based in the Philippines. And then today is going to be about planning my next workshop for innovators. And throughout the week, I spend a lot of time talking with other supporters of innovation, whether that's my colleagues or their innovation managers, but there are a few different organizations that do similar things to the HIF around the world. So, I talk to them as much as I can as well to learn from what they're doing and share what we've been doing. So there's always a good amount of that in there too.
I'm exhausted just hearing you talk about it. But what's interesting is you're touching on some of the really big themes around managing innovation that there are major research programs still trying to look at. The question of moving to scale rather than just the startup question, the challenge of bringing users in, the issue of working with multiple stakeholders and managing ecosystems. These are all sort of frontline issues which you're clearly working with and experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Maybe another question sort of half linked to that. This is a sector which didn't, as you said, formally consider managing innovation until relatively recently. They've been doing innovation all along, but the thought of being able to repeat the trick and get better at doing it by learning, by managing it, that's fairly recent, maybe the last 10 years or so. I wonder if you could sort of do this sort of looking back and looking forward. Where do you think the progress has been? What are the achievements that the sector has made? And where are the big challenges on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question, John, and a big one. I think the really big achievement is that there is, I would say now, a very strong ecosystem for supporting humanitarian innovation. So there are a number of funds like the Humanitarian Innovation Fund to support the development of innovations, and there's increasing knowledge about how you do that effectively. So I think the transition there is actually huge, and just the growth in the sector is amazing. So I think that's our big success, and there are some great success stories of innovations changing the way that aid is delivered. So cash programming is often cited as a big example, or a change in the way that malnutrition is treated. So taking it out of necessarily being in clinic settings into the community, which is just much better in a lot of different ways. So it's all about the impact. But the fact that support system exists for me is amazing. But I think the big challenge is now we're at a point where there are a lot of kind of innovations that have proof of concept, but the barriers to scaling those and implementing them kind of in the mainstream is still really, really challenging. And there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. Some of them are very good reasons. Some of them are very frustrating reasons. And they're not very well understood. So we're, one of the things we do at the HIP is we're doing a lot of research into that. So understanding how procurement systems work in aid agencies. Why is it so hard to sell a new kind of hand washing station to an aid agency? And how do we get the numbers large enough to make it kind of a viable opportunity? Because actually, when you're in the aid sector, it feels quite big, but in comparison with the rest of the world, it's very small. So the number of hand washing stations that we purchase is relatively low, etc. So, we haven't really faced up to the reality of some of those complexities before, and decision making is quite complex. Lots and lots of people are involved in lots of decisions that are made about humanitarian response, which by human nature makes it very easy for the answer to ultimately be no rather than yes. It's easier for people to say no than say yes, and that's a human thing rather than a humanitarian thing. But of course, there is a real fear of failure and the risk that could pose to people affected by crises, and that is the ultimate worst case scenario. So yeah, there's really a lot of challenges that still exist, but I'm optimistic because there are a lot of people who are recognizing those challenges and the need to overcome them. We can deliver aid better, and I think there's a recognition of that, and a willingness to change. But it's just it's a hard system to change.
Yes, indeed, yeah. But as a student of innovation, I'm fascinated by the fact that right now, sadly, we're in the middle of this dreadful pandemic, which is a crisis, global, and we're doing a lot of new things around innovation because we're having to assemble odd coalitions, crowdsource, all this kind of thing. And of course, it strikes me that that's the world you tend to inhabit on a daily basis when you're trying to manage innovation in the sector. So it's good to hear some of the optimism and indeed to look back at some of the achievements. Abby, maybe one last question, if I could. If I take anything from this interview, it's a kind of picture of you juggling all sorts of balls in the air and managing not to drop them. It's a very varied job, a very challenging one. You've accumulated a lot of experience, you brought a lot in, but you've clearly built that as you've gone along. Could I perhaps ask you for a moment to be Auntie Abby? I know you're far too young to be Auntie Abby, but Auntie Abby, and if you were giving some advice to someone starting out in a career in innovation management, in whatever kind of organisation. Any tips you'd give them?
I think there's probably two things that stand out to me. One is there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you're wondering, someone else is wondering, and someone in a previous role gave me that confidence to truly believe that, and it has held me in very good stead since then. So, never worry about asking what could be a stupid question. And the second thing is to trust your instincts, really. I said at the beginning I wouldn't see what I've done as a career, and I, the way that I do see that is I've followed a series of interesting projects, and when something's come up which has caught my attention and it's just felt like the right thing to do, I've gone and done it, and some of that's worked, some of it hasn't, but it's all, of course, contributed to where I am now. So I think, I see quite a big hesitation to that approach in many people, being cautious about that and the need for a career. I don't necessarily see myself as a career innovation manager, but what I'm doing right now is the right thing, and it's incredibly interesting, incredibly varied. It's an amazing job, but yeah, it's not necessarily the last thing that I'll do.
That's lovely, Abby. Thank you so much for giving us quite a lot of a personal perspective, but certainly a wonderful insight into a very interesting and different context for innovation management. I guess if people would like to know more about the HIF, the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, they can find out. I'll put a website link at the end of this. But for now, Abby, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, John.